Hey, all right. Now, good morning. You're watching Fair World Order. My name is Jeff. The day is February 9th, 2021. Out of all the things I have to set up in the morning, there was one button I forgot to press, so that was why there was no audio at the beginning. All right, so today is Tuesday. Wanted to talk about something that caught my attention last week. Some of you may have seen, if you're on the internet, all of you have seen the Bernie Sanders memes from the inauguration with Bernie and his mittens. I think I talked about it on the show once, and I definitely spread a few myself. But they kind of stole the show. Bernie Sanders kind of stole the show at the inauguration just by sitting there grumpily in his mittens trying to stay warm. And for the most part, most people saw just as, Bernie being Bernie, and kind of appreciated what, him and what he stands for. Or even if people that may not agree with Bernie Sanders just kind of appreciated the old curmudgeonly aspect and the whole scene, and enjoyed the humor of juxtaposing old curmudgeonly Bernie Sanders in the Millennium Falcon, or in a Jane's Addiction album, or Wizard of Oz, or any of the thousands of memes that were posted about it. But there was some backlash, particularly from the Democratic Party, and that's kind of what I wanted to. That's what I want to talk about today. Was this backlash to the Bernie Sanders memes and just his mere presence, apparently at the inauguration. So there was Ingrid Sire Ochi wrote an op-ed for the San Francisco Chronicle, and Miss Sire Ochi is a professor at the University of California in the Center for New Racial Studies. She is an assistant professor, at least according to the school's website. She's an assistant professor, and this is on the UC Berkeley campus. And I kind of want to go over a couple quotes from her op-ed. So she writes, "What did I see? What did I think my students should see? A wealthy, incredibly well-educated, and privileged white man showing up for perhaps the most important ritual of the decade in a puffy jacket and huge mittens." She went on to say, "I am beyond puzzled as to why so many are loving the images of Bernie and his gloves. Sweet, yes. The gloves knit by an educator, so Bernie. Not so sweet, the blindness I see, of so many, Bernie included, to the privilege Bernie represents. I don't know how many poor, or working class, or female, or struggling to be taken seriously folk who would show up at the inauguration of our 46th president dressed like Bernie. Unless those same folk had privilege, which they don't." She also clarifies, Senator Sanders is no white supremacist insurrectionist, but he manifests privilege, white privilege, male privilege, and class privilege in ways that my students could see and feel. So this is really frustrating. And there's a huge counter backlash to this op-ed, and it's an example of what I would consider is endemic in our discourse right now, is feigned outrage, or feigned offense, or manufactured outrage. And to some extent, I'm sure Sara Ochi was genuinely upset. But I'm going to treat this as an example of feigned outrage, because there's no actual reason to justify her being upset, or to justify her writing an op-ed about it. The argument could be made, I guess, to be charitable, right? So when we're having an argument, we should always exercise the principle of charity, which is the concept that you frame your opponent's argument in the best possible manner. I guess what she could say is that because of the importance of Kamala Harris being elected vice president, and the presence of Michelle Obama, the first African American first lady, the presence of the poet laureate, and I apologize for I don't have her name in front of me, but on a moment that was so important, particularly for women of color, that for Bernie Sanders just to show up and just treat it as another day, wasn't recognizing the importance of that day, of what this meant to a lot of people. And I can understand that. I'm actually sympathetic to that point of view. And I do believe that you can reverse engineer people's intentions by their actions. And you can kind of reverse engineer that to Bernie Sanders. This was just another day. But some of the things she said, particularly saying that he's no white supremacist insurrectionist. That is, and there's, I'm actually going to play a clip from Katie Hopper in a minute, and they actually talked about this. There is a rhetorical device where you ask a question and then, but in asking the question, imply that even though the answer is no, you're implying that the answer could be yes just by the fact that you answer the question, just because you asked the question in the first place. Bernie Sanders is not a white supremacist insurrectionist. He's not a white supremacist. He's not an insurrectionist. To even suggest that it could be an issue, or to in any way suggest that to equate him with that, is just disgusting and offensive. To say that his entire, everything he did was because of privilege, Bernie Sanders has been doing more to fight for the people that she's claiming benefit from this than anybody else in Congress over the last 40 years. And this raises a question that's brought up in a book called the Feminism for the 99%. Which I think I just messed up that title. Actually, I'm going to look that up real quick, so I don't want to mess that up. Feminism for the 99% Manifesto. And I'm going to be talking about this book a little bit later, not today, but I'm going to do more of an in-depth review of that book a little bit later. But it raises a question of how best, from a progressive, liberal, Democrat point of view, how best to approach politics from a class consciousness perspective or from a demographic identity perspective. So Bernie Sanders is out there fighting for a $15 minimum wage. He's out there fighting for Medicare for all. He's out there fighting for immediate a large COVID relief package for all working class Americans. He's out there doing and has been doing the dirty work on behalf of working class, poor Americans for decades. And then you have a class of politicians, particularly in the Democratic Party, who think that breaking the glass ceiling, who think that breaking the gender gap, the racial gap, is itself the goal. So I ask you, what's the point of, and I'm going to talk about Janet Yellen here a little bit later, but what's the point of getting a female as the Secretary of the Treasury if she's going to immediately go back on promises to working class people and cost millions of Americans, working class Americans, tens of millions of working class American women of all colors, COVID relief? Is that really progress? It's nice that there is a woman in that position, but if the policies that she's going to push aren't benefiting working class Americans, then what have we actually accomplished? And I want to cut over right now to a clip from, I mentioned Katie Hopper a minute ago, and I want to show a little bit of a clip from her discussion about this. This is on her podcast, on her show, she was talking with Kate Levin. And I'm not going to show the part where she did this, but she also really went in on Sire Ochi for anti-Semitism. And in this case, Katie Hopper was intentionally employing mock outrage. She wasn't in any way saying that Sire Ochi was anti-Semite, but she was saying how easy it is to play this game, this gotcha game of woke politics, if you're gonna compare somebody to a white supremacist insurrectionist who also happens to be Jewish, that could be seen as anti-Semitic. Katie Halper was not suggesting that Sarah Oshie was anti-Semitic, just commenting on how easy it is to play that game of mock outrage. So I'm going to cut over to this real quick because I think it's really interesting what a point that she made on this.
Oh, and then Kevin G. I can't help but feel this article intentionally elevated by the media to make the public hate teachers, think their kids are being feminist brainwashed. Oh. Maybe, but then people like this should not be writing these articles. And everyone, friends don't let their pseudo feminist friends write this stuff. So the thing that really kills me about this is and after you go, Kate, I'll share with people the article I wrote. Remember the Susan Bordeaux piece I wrote? A millennial feminist explains feminism to a boomer feminist, an obnoxious title. But there is a very personalized politics that is absolutely narcissistic, self-obsessed, and you think that your experiences, the microaggressions that you've experienced are more important than the experiences of the countless people with much less power than you. And you elevate your own personal journey and things resonate with you or don't resonate with you. And it's like, it's really, in some ways, it's confusing therapy with politics. And I can't stand that because it is so like, it's just so self-indulgent, but it's under the guise of concern for others. But it's like the least solidaristic form of politics that you could ever imagine. What would you say? I'm writing a tweet.
All right, so that was Katie Halper. Let me kind of reset myself here. And I hadn't thought of it exactly the way she had, but the narcissism, the elevating one's own experiences above anything else leads to these really bad faith arguments. Now, so in this discussion, I've mentioned fake outrage. I also mentioned the principle of charity. I'm going to loop back around to this principle of charity. Whenever you're in a discussion with somebody, whenever you are in an argument, a formal argument, a conversation, it is absolutely imperative to employ the principle of charity, to rephrase their arguments and your opponent's arguments in the strongest possible manner, so that your arguments aren't fallacious in themselves. There's another argument. There's the straw man argument, in which you use the weakest form of your opponent's argument, but that is essentially a fallacy. Mock outrage isn't necessarily it's not a formal fallacy. It's more of a rhetorical device. But it leads to people getting off topic and arguing about the argument rather than actually trying to constructively solve any problem. Again, I don't have any issue with Sarah Oshie commenting on. The problem isn't so much that she commented on the appearance of it, and in some ways, especially the memes the following day completely overshadowed everything that was happening at the inauguration with Kamala Harris's speech, and it is recognizable how important that moment was for so many people, and the Bernie Sanders memes did kind of undercut that. But in the bigger picture, if you're truly a feminist, if you truly care about, and let's see, what is her title again? She's an assistant professor, Graduate School of Education in the Center for New Racial Studies. If you really care about oppression and justice for people of color and for women, then you have to be looking at the actual economic policies people are proposing. It doesn't matter what color somebody is or what their gender is, if they're reinforcing the same class conflict and exploitation of the working class that the white males before them did. So, and particularly in the 2016 and 2020 Democratic primaries, there was a overwhelming sense of feigned outrage that was really meant to the Democratic Party couldn't deal with Bernie Sanders on the merits, so they often resorted to feigning outrage, criticism over the Bernie Bros. There was one woman on a news program that said he just makes her skin crawl. Didn't justify it. Couldn't say why. Just his skin makes my skin crawl. And in the context of the whole Bernie Bros from 2016, just kind of implied a level of misogyny, tried to attach a level of misogyny to Bernie Sanders that's just not consistent with the things he advocates for. So that's my discussion. I encourage people to go look up Katie Halper. She's incredibly funny and just really insightful. Just really cuts to the point on a lot of political issues, and just has a knack for cutting through the BS and going straight to what the underlying issue is. So get a chance, go check out Katie Halper. And I would encourage everybody, if you can get behind the paywall of the San Francisco Chronicle, go look up what Ingrid Sire Ochi had actually said, the full context of her quotes. But be wary of people. Just be wary of anybody who's making an argument that steers you to an emotional state rather than here's the facts and my premises and the conclusions derived from that. So, and with that being said, we are going to move on to kind of a personal matter for me. So here we go. All right, so today's GoFundMe campaign, this is actually somebody I know. This is so Carmen is in a friend group that I'm a part of here in Tucson, and she contracted COVID-19 and is not doing well. So there is a campaign, and I'm going to cut over to it real quick. So that's Carmen over there in the kind of purple shirt right here. Very, very nice woman. We're just a ball of energy. So much fun to be around. The few times I've been able to see her, and she is not doing well right now. Her bills could be as high as $10,000 a day, and at this time they're only asking for $10,000. But knowing what goes on with hospital bills, they are going to need a lot more than that. So, again, as always, the link for this campaign is in the description below. If you can, please go make as much of a donation as you can to help her out, and just look for anybody else. Unfortunately, we have a for-profit healthcare system, and not everybody can afford to support those profits. So wherever you can, help out, and most importantly, vote for politicians that are going to support a Medicare for all or some sort of universal single-payer healthcare system. And with that, I'm going to take a short break. We'll be back in just a minute. Here's the paradox to honesty. We have to strive to finding truth even while acknowledging it may not exist. I don't believe in any absolute truth, but I strive to be honest in all of my thoughts and actions. Everyone has their own concept of what's true, and we have to have the humility to recognize that we can be wrong. Honesty is difficult. Committing to searching for something we'll never find is frustrating and sometimes painful. But without that commitment, all other values lose their foundation. We have a choice to make. Are we building our society based on competition with each other? On getting as much as we can while we can? In a competitive society, values are only there to ensure the exploited stay in line. The alternative is a society rooted in cooperation, working together to overcome the natural challenges of life, of sharing our resources and the product of our labor. And fairness is the cornerstone of a cooperative society. All right, we're going to go ahead and take a look at some news around the world. Starting off with, all right, this story is coming to us from Al Jazeera, and it's an update on the India farmer protest. And now, so for the last few days, tens of thousands of farmers have been blocking highways across the country. Um, and the United Nations is calling on both authorities and the protesters to exercise restraint. There was a three-hour Chaco Jam roadblock on Saturday, and I think it looks like most of society is in support of the farmers. And this is something you see over and over again. The majority of people understand the exploitation of labor and will support that labor, but for some reason we keep electing politicians that support capital rather than the workers. Let's see, thousands of security forces outside of India's capital. So one interesting thing, I actually really, I've heard this story in the background for a couple months, but it was a couple weeks ago. I went to a local restaurant, an Indian restaurant here in Tucson, and the owner of it, came up to me and just started talking to me about this story. And it's not an experience you would typically have in a restaurant. You don't typically have the owner start coming up to you and talking politics with you, and she's like pulling out her phone and saying, see this, see what's going on. But in this case, I'm really glad she did. It really opened my eyes to something that, again, I kind of had heard in the background, but wasn't really paying attention to. But this is one of the most important stories in the world right now. And if you support, in America, we tend to have a divide between urban and rural. But one of my goals for this show is to bridge that divide, because at the end of the day, working class is working class. It doesn't matter if you're working in a factory, or if you're a farmer, or if you are a waiter or waitress, a server in a upscale New York steakhouse. The labor class, we need to have solidarity with each other. And in this case, in India, the biggest issue is most of the farms in India are really small scale. One family, one person owning 3 or 4 acres, and they farm that little piece of land. But they can survive off of, historically they've been able to survive off of these really small lands because the government set certain price guarantees. There was an exchange, there was a government run exchange that you had to sell it to. The farmers had to sell to these exchanges. Excuse me. But they had a price guarantee. The 3 bills that were passed in the fall allows people to sell to anybody, which means those price guarantees are going to go away. And when the price guarantees go away, prices start dropping. Those little small scale farmers may not be able to survive, or most likely will not be able to survive the ups and downs of the market, which creates opportunity for large scale farmers to come in and buy up those farms. And eventually you'll have a consolidation of ownership of farmland, rather than millions of small scale farmers. There will become millions of large scale laborers. The Indian farmers know this. They've seen this happen before in other countries, and they're desperately trying to make sure it doesn't happen here. And to the point where it's worth now I think we're going on 3-month protest. So in any way you can, learn about this and support the Indian farmers as much as you can. Switching over to an update on Myanmar. Let's see. This is also from Al Jazeera. Not much of an update here, other than the military rulers of Myanmar are supporting the coup that they enacted. There are a slew of decrees issued this week. A curfew banning gatherings, so just a further escalation of the cracking down on the protesters. And there's a couple follow-up stories that I wanted to hit on this. So this is the third wave of coup and protests. Earlier ones were in 1988 and 2007, and that'll lead into some of the memes that we're going to take a look at here in just a moment. Basically, Myanmar has been trying to become a democratic country. This is here this is Myanmar, but this could have been almost any city in the United States. Over the last year, and it's important to note that the people that were ousted during this coup, they won the election in a landslide. There's no legitimate question about the legitimacy of the election. This is just the military of Myanmar lost, and they have the monopoly of violence, so they're not going away. This one has me a little bit agitated, trepidation. So this is Bloomberg reporting that confidential UK diplomats are saying that the coup is irreversible. So what troubles me about this is you have a prominent American newspaper citing an undisclosed, a confidential UK informant, and basically saying, yep, the game is over. There's nothing that can be done. The coup is irreversible. Meanwhile, publicly, all of these nations are condemning the coup. This, and I don't know that this is true or not, but it tells me that there are forces that are okay with the coup happening. My guess, this is just a hypothesis. I don't have any evidence on this, but just seeing this play out over several times, the faction that won the elections in Myanmar were probably to some extent pro-labor, pro-working class. So there is probably a significant amount of foreign money, and when I say foreign, I mean foreign to Myanmar money backing this coup. And even though the democratic countries, Australia, UK, United States, are condemning the coup, I'm willing to bet there is significant money saying, maybe, if not outright supporting the coup, putting up roadblocks to opposing the coup. So this is just something, again, we really need to be more cognizant of what's going on in the world. And hopefully this UK informant is wrong and the coup does get reversed. It's going to lead to the last update of the day on Myanmar. So this is actually something I saw on TikTok first yesterday. But there's the younger people that are engaged in this protest are being they did not leave their sense of humor at home. So their signs are quite clever. I want a relationship, not a dictatorship. My ex is bad, but Myanmar military is worse. Here we go again. I don't want a dictatorship. I just want boyfriend. Military coup years is, I'm not sure what that means. Say no to dictatorship. Say yes to relationship. So there's just a lot of just a lot of signs that are pretty funny and are kind of getting attention. And WAP, we are protesting peacefully. That's funny. So it's just struck me as kind of funny and just a different way of approaching. Just a different way of approaching protesting. And the signs usually tend to try to do something to get attention. And usually have somewhat of a sense of humor to them, but these are particularly dismissive of the Myanmar military, of really just trying to undercut their importance, and it's quite amusing. All right, so this last story I'm going to look at is just starting to get on my radar. So this comes to us from France, where a man by the name of Adama apologize, I'm probably going to mess this up, but Adama Traoré died in police custody, and there have been mass protests and riots throughout the country. This story is coming to us from Russia Today. The doctor said they believe he suffered a heat stroke. Well, all right. The doctor is saying he died of heat stroke, but the role in the lethal process of a period of suffocation due to physical constraint cannot be ruled out. And so there's some people referring to this man as the George Floyd of France. France does have a rising population from Africa, and there's been significant tension within France between white Frenchmen and black Muslims from Africa and other blacks from Africa. So the Black Lives Matter movement is spreading throughout the world. And here we are seeing these protests. So I'll bring up a picture. My battery is dying here. Bring up a picture of the protest here. Although I'm not sure if that's, so this is a photo from France. I think that earlier one the one I initially showed was actually from Rochester, New York. So that is the world news. And now we are moving on to all right. Today's Innocence Project. This is one of the first cases listed on their website. And go ahead and cut over to this. This is the story of Habib Wahir Abdal. He was a woman in Buffalo, New York, was raped in May of 1982. She described somebody who generally fit his description, and then she was shown a 4-year-old picture of Mr. Abdal, and identified him based on that 4-year-old photo. He was sentenced to 20 years to life, served 16 years, and there was one thing, a show-up procedure. See, forensic analysis testified. So a forensic analysis said that the hairs found on the victim and the hairs found on Mr. Abdal were different, but he couldn't exclude Abdal because the hair on the victim still could have come from Abdal, but from possibly a different person, or different hairs from the same person. So even though he couldn't match them, he still wouldn't rule out Abdal as a suspect. DNA testing eventually exonerated him, and he was awarded $2 million. He was awarded $2 million in 2002, and then but passed away shortly after that. Yeah. So again, just encourage everybody to take a look at the Innocence Project, take a look at these stories for yourself. But once again, witness identification is always risky. We like to think that we see somebody and we can recognize them, but we see over and over again, especially when somebody is in a high stress situation, that these identifications are often wrong, and it's particularly when police use improper identification procedures. Identifying somebody from a 4-year-old photo, and then seeing that person in a lineup. Was she recognize the person from the photo, or was she recognize the person that actually raped her? In this case, she was just identifying somebody from the photo, and the actual assailant was never caught, was never convicted. So, moving on. And it is time to pet your rep. So today, I will be writing Raul Grijalva, and this is what I have to say. And this goes a little bit to something I mentioned earlier. To Representative Grijalva, I am troubled by what I am seeing so far from the Biden administration. I know that you have been an advocate for American workers, but it does not appear the administration and many of your party members share your conviction. From President Biden stating that he doesn't think a $15 minimum wage will survive the Congress, to Janet Yellen's proposing to reduce the one-time COVID relief payment to only people making under $60,000, this administration is caving on issues and backtracking on promises without any fight, to the extent that I have to question whether it was ever committed to these policies in the first place. Please be an outspoken critic of this administration, fight for what the working class deserves, and be the moral compass the Democratic Party sorely needs. So Representative Grijalva is in the Justice Democrats caucus. He was one of the first people to switch over to the Justice Democrats. And the Justice Democrats, in order to carry the name of Justice Democrat, you have to swear off all corporate PAC money. So he was one of the first to do it. I know he's an advocate for working class people, but it doesn't seem like the true advocates are being heard by this administration or by their peers. So I mentioned earlier the book Feminism for the 99%, a manifesto, and this is exactly the point that the authors were making in the book, and the authors were, I'll pull it up here real quick. The authors were Cynthia Aruza, Chithi Patacha, and Nancy Fraser. But basically, their point is, it doesn't matter if you close the gender gap, for example, if the overwhelming majority of women are still in poverty or one emergency away from poverty. If you just take the billionaire class, the billionaires, and make sure it's 50% women, 50% men that are billionaires, that's not really true progress, because the overwhelming number of women are still being exploited. So you have Janet Yellen, who is most recently making $7 million plus for speaking to Wall Street firms, or advocating for Wall Street firms, and now she's the Secretary of the Treasury. That's not really a step forward for women if she's immediately going to cave on all the promises of COVID relief. That's going to cost tens of millions of women needed money right now. So I'm going to go ahead and send that off to Representative Grijalva. And if I ever get a response from him, I will share that response on air. But so far, there has not been a response. It can take some time to these. So, and again, if you're not sure, how to find a representative, you can go to house.gov, the Find a Representative section, and put in your zip code, and it'll tell you and it'll take you directly to your representative's website. So, and I think with that, I'm going to go ahead and close out today's show. So I'm going to kick it over to the last word, and I will see you guys tomorrow.
You're going to be asked to define communism, and then you're going to look stupid because you don't know what communism is.
Definitely not a Republican, but I'm also not a leftist, a Democrat, or a Demso.